Well, in just about 2.5 months, Donald Trump will be unpacking his bags at the White House in what some are calling a Trumpocalypse. Yet others are saying and terming it a catastrophe, and some others are saying that perhaps this is the best presidency that America needs. Well, we shall be unpacking some of these discussions. I have a great panel tonight. We should also be looking at some of local news here and across the borders. Of course, you're watching News Sources. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. It is the Ladies' Night edition. Let's take a look at the highlights tonight.
It was not a campaign, but rather an incredible and great movement made up of millions of hardworking men and women who love their country and want a better, brighter future for themselves and for their family. Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
This was a white lash. This was a white lash against a changing country. It was a white lash against a black president in part. And that's the part where the pain comes.
Right, of course, indeed, a very historic night witnessed in the United States of America. The politics there, historic decision that was made by the Americans, one that was really unexpected by many, shocking. Some are nursing heartbreaks and some are feeling really proud with that decision. We shall be talking about that in a moment. But let's take a look at this soundbite first.
You're awake, by the way. You're not having a terrible, terrible dream. Also, you're not dead and you haven't gone to hell. This is your life now. This is our election now. This is us. This is our country. It's real.
All right, yes, we shall be delving into that hot discussion a little bit later. But first, let me introduce my panel tonight. On my immediate left, I have Wangare Muikia, who is a public financial management specialist. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Wangare. And then we have, in the middle there, we have Betty Waitherero. Betty is a researcher in political communications. Thank you for joining us. And of course, a familiar face on my far left there, Joy Doreen Bira, who is a business anchor and reporter here, as well as a moderator on various Pan-African conferences. Thank you for joining us tonight,
Thank you for
Joy.
having us.
But let's begin with local news here tonight and just take a look at the first story, and that the first batch of Kenyan troops who were serving in a UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan has arrived home today following a presidential order. President Uhuru Kenyatta ordered them to withdraw in response to the sacking of Kenyan commander of the UN mission in South Sudan force. The sacking that happened after a UN inquiry accused the mission of failing to respond to an attack on a Juba hotel during fighting in July has set Kenya on a collision path with the United Nations.
And today we have started our withdrawal from South Sudan following the directive given by His Excellency the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Kenya Defense Forces last week. KDF has taken part in many peacekeeping operations from 1979 to date. To date, we have taken part in peacekeeping operations in 44 countries. In all these operations, Kenya Defense Forces have performed very well.
So, ladies, a total of 1,000 forces are expected back in the country. Of course, a very decisive, decision by Kenya to pull out of, this mission. What is your take on what this says in terms of, really friendship and, foreign relations? I'll start with you.
Thank you, Sharon. I think this is a very big message that Kenya is sending to the international community, especially the UN. The big reason behind the withdrawal of the troops was that the UN decided to fire, essentially. I think he's called Lieutenant General Ondieki, a well-seasoned army, someone in the army. He has worked for 34 years in the army. in very senior positions, not only in the country but also internationally. And when the UN decided to remove him, they did not consult Kenya. They just fired him and let Kenya know. So this is
And
very.
this was a diplomatic
This is a very
kind of
very
mistake, so to speak.
diplomatic mess. I think the UN really needed to be more diplomatic in essence towards Kenya, because Kenya has been a key partner in keeping the peace in South Sudan and in the area. So we really needed to be consulted and to be diplomatic relations and communications to be stronger in that scenario.
Joy and Wangari is calling this a diplomatic mess. And do you think the UN had any kind of right to show heavy-handedness in how it handled that situation there? And did they do this wrong?
Well, I think they did it wrong, because I'm just trying to compare. If this lieutenant was an American, would the UN have acted the same way that it did, with Lieutenant Ondeki? Because now when you look at the different manner in which the United Nations handles different situations, that's when you start to think that maybe there's a level of respect that they accord to, say, American lieutenants. And when they call, UN troops who are American to get out of, say, the Central African Republic, they do it in such a respectful way. They actually follow procedure and then they pull out. They don't just suck people, and even if it's sucking, actually there's a procedure that they have to take. But this spontaneous sucking actually raised a lot of questions, and I think, yes, I agree, it was very disrespectful, and I think President Uhuru Kenyatta, in his own right as Commander-in-Chief, he could have made the right decision to say, you know what, just come back home, because if my lieutenant is sacked just like that, what's going to happen to the rest of the soldiers or the troops who are in South Sudan?
Handling that particular situation. And Betty, do you think that this was particularly because, it's, as Joy says, they have some sort of protocol that they follow in their, Western, perhaps, kind of troops? Do you think it's a show of disrespect for
when you look at how the UN has handled other grave situations where the peacekeeping troops were not able to respond or did not respond, you can see that there's a distinct difference in how they managed the situation, the way they treated the commanders in charge. And I do agree with Joy and with Wangari that actually this was a really big faux pas for them. In addition, you can already sense that this is like a build-up of political sentiment towards the UN, and we saw this especially with the decision by Kenya to shut down the Dadaab camp. Again, you saw at that time, around the time for the UNGA, in New York, Uhuru Kenyatta just chose to stay in Kenya. So it seems that there's a very strong political message going out to the international community, and particularly the UN, that, you know what, we're tired of being pushed around. And when you think about how much Kenya has invested in terms of peace in South Sudan, leading the IGAD process, trying to get them to come down and, cease fire and deal with all this, I think that all that accumulated counted for nothing in this one instance. And I agree that Uhuru was right in, just making this decision. No, I cannot let my troops be treated this way.
Right. Yeah. And we saw the Ministry of Foreign Affairs just saying that this was a systematic dysfunctionality by that mission, the UN mission in South Sudan. And perhaps, do you think that this was a way of, because now we're just trying to see where this problem was, because the fact is, what they were saying, the reasons for sacking the force commander is because of failing to protect citizens. And of course, we saw citizens dying in that July, crisis. So where really was the problem in all this?
I think the UN MISS operation that's been in Sudan, it started in 2011, I believe. And since then, they've been having a series of problems. They've been having so many challenges. And even last year, Kenya was in the middle of brokering a peace deal between Machar and Salva Kiir, which fell apart in July anyway. And there have been multiple problems. So for the Lieutenant General, I'm just going to call him Commander because I'm not quite sure of his title, out of respect. He just started in May. So how is it that it's his problem? He's the one who has made the whole mission fail. It just started in May. This UN MISS started in 2011. It had a series of challenges, and the buck does not, although the buck does stop with the senior levels of office, I don't think they went senior enough. I think you need to talk to the people who crafted the framework around the UN MISS and talk to and look at what the framework was and who actually whose head should roll. It shouldn't just be on the Kenyan side. There should be several people who should be held to account in this failure of this mission.
Right. And of course, Joy, Kenya has been a part of this peacekeeping mission right from the start. So what does it mean when we pull out of this? I mean, we have that, being party to the United Nations, of course, but also we have that sovereignty in the sense that we have that right to pull out. But then we also have that friendship with the South Sudan. So what then next?
Well, Sharon, if I might take it from as far back as 2013, when the unrest broke out in South Sudan, there are several East African countries that offered support to South Sudan, and these actually included, Ugandan troops, Kenyan troops, as well as, troops from Burundi as well, who went into South Sudan. But then again, you saw that there was a little bit of uncooperation, even amongst these countries with South Sudan, because it was a difficult situation. And then when we actually offered this support together with the UN mission, it should have been some sort of appreciation, because you don't do this all the time. We all have our problems as independent countries to deal with, some of them security problems. So by our troops offering to go into South Sudan to take care of the situation, and then later on we do see some bit of unbalanced decisions being made, I think in a way it does show that maybe there are different ways in which we deal with certain situations. So the United Nations needs to find a way of cooperating with all the troops, regardless of what country they're from, on the African continent or outside of the continent.
All right. Right, let's move on now to another subject. And before we do that, actually, I need to engage our viewers on our Twitter poll tonight, and we're taking it to the U.S. with that historic, decision that was made today. And we're asking you, what do you think the Trump presidency means to the world? What do you think the Trump presidency means to the world? Do tweet us your thoughts at KTN News or directly to me at Sharon_Mumanyi using the hashtag news sources, and I shall be sampling your views as we continue with this broadcast. We're also expecting another panelist tonight, that is Wangui Mbatia, who I see has just joined us, so she will be joining us on set in a few moments. But do keep engaging us on Twitter in this discussion on what you think the Trump presidency means to the world. Let's move on now. And the taxman has refused to release Deputy President William Ruto's tax returns following a demand by activist Boniface Mwangi. Mwangi had written to the Kenya Revenue Authority asking for Ruto's wealth declarations returns for the period that he has been Deputy President. In his letter, he also demanded a list of Ruto's companies, the names of people listed as co-directors, and the dividends paid to him by each firm. So what really gives is a question that we're asking tonight. KRA has refused to give those documents. Do you think they have, what's your take on this whole scenario? Was there any possible scenario that KRA could have, given us this list that Boniface is asking for?
Okay, first of all, Boniface has put himself in this situation where he's created an argument. Actually, he's created an answer to an argument, and now is going back and creating the argument. And the answer to the argument is Ruto is corrupt, and now he's going back to try and prove it by asking for all these KRA documents to sort of try and prove the connection towards corrupt cartels and scandals. And he's in a very precarious situation. And he seems to have followed the same script. I hate to say this, but he seems to have followed the same script that the OTP, Chief Prosecutor Bensouda, followed with Ruto, where basically you've created the argument, you've profiled charges, and now you're asking the government, hey, by the way, give me so-and-so's phone number, records of his phone calls and all that, yeah?
All right. So which argument?
Well,
he's created the argument.
His argument is that Ruto is corrupt. To prove his argument, he's going to try and link Ruto to scandal XYZ using the argument that, where did he get all this money? See this, his companies don't, show commensurate revenues to the wealth that he has. It's a very difficult thing to prove, but KRA has brought about the legal factor in proving that, in his request that, you as a citizen, in as much as this is a public official and he is your deputy president, you cannot ask for these documents unless you have permission from him. Which is
But
a
this
very
argument,
interesting.
This
It's a
argument,
very
Betty,
it's a
it
very
has just
interesting.
been, I don't think it's really, like if we are just looking at it critically
Yeah.
and objectively, has not really been entirely a Boniface argument.
Yeah.
Because there has really been a lot of, questions by the public
Yeah.
about
Exactly.
asking that kind of accountability. And do you think, Joy, that at any point, he's a public servant, one would argue,
Yeah.
that do we need to see, accountability, transparency, actually? Is the public owed that? And in what form, maybe, if not with this list?
Well, yes, the public could be owed that, but there is also the rule of law where you do not go past the law
Right.
just because you are looking for evidence. And just like Betty said, each time you actually sue somebody, you must have some credible evidence to actually go give yourself a good defense. So what we're seeing right now is that Boniface Mwangi might not have the evidence or might not have the real facts. And so he is using this KRA as a way of actually bringing out the real evidence
Right,
that
so
probably if
like
he...
his witch hunting.
Yeah, that if he
in a
brings
sense.
out this, if KRA releases this information, there could be something else that could incriminate the deputy president. So while some people are looking at this as a David and Goliath sort of situation, it's more of whether or not he's doing everything as required by the law. And I don't think there's something that is not right in the way he's demanding for this information.
All right.
Yeah.
And ladies, allow me to introduce Wangoi Mbatia. Thank you so much for joining us. And before we do that, thank you for joining us, policy consultant. I'm just told that Obama is currently is giving a speech at the moment, so we want to just cross over and listen in to that before we continue with our discussion tonight. Let's just cross over and listen in.